Welcome back to The Right Angle, the podcast for fantasy readers, writers, and anyone who loves a good story. Hi, I'm Autumn.
And I'm Adrienne. For this episode, we asked our listeners, what do you want to hear from The Right Angle? One submission stated, your own work. So today we're extremely excited to read and discuss some of our own writings and things we've been working on.
So Adrienne and I couldn't decide who would get to read first. So we're going to, on recording, do rock, paper, scissors real quick to see who gets to go first.
So just to clarify, if someone wins, they read first.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Oh, shoot. Okay, that's me.
Adrienne got paper, or no.
I got scissors.
Adrienne got scissors, I got paper. So Adrienne's reading first.
Okay, perfect. I think it would be really fun if each of us choose the other ones, what they're going to read next. So, Autumn, what should I read first?
I would like you to start off with one of your poems, specifically probably one of my favorite ones, and I think we can do a little shout out here, one that Adrienne got published recently in our campus's literary journal. So please read Put It to Pasture Like a Good Housewife.
Put it to pasture like a good housewife. There is always a more laundry to fold, more meals to make, more tables to clean, more dishes to wash, more. When productivity takes priority, often it is love that is abandoned. When there is no more verve for the task, when you are forced to create for the sake of creation, you find yourself utterly and totally desolate. When creativity is put to pasture, and there's nothing left to do but churn and churn and churn, butter yellow daffodils turn their happy, yet still unsatiated gazes to me, always and forever, wanting more.
Thank you, Adrienne. For this poem, I want to ask you a little bit about what inspired this poem and how did this idea come to you?
This poem on the surface sounds like it's about, the struggles of a housewife who has to do everything, right? But this poem is actually about when I was thinking about what it means to be creative as a job, kind of like we talked about in our previous episode, The Routines of Creatives. So I was thinking about what it means to have to create as an assignment, almost. When I was doing compositions of music and I had to do it, it's very different. And I'm sure you feel very similarly, Autumn, being an English major and having to write creative works all the time for classes. But the idea specifically, most of my poetry really just comes from an emotion that I'm feeling and I don't really know what it means yet. And so I just really wanted to get it out, and this is what came out, really. My favorite line is, and there's nothing left to do but churn and churn and churn, butter yellow daffodils, etc. I think it's interesting how that line turns into something else.
I love that explanation. I love getting to hear about a piece from the author themselves. There's nothing like it because authors truly understand their pieces in ways that I don't think the audience gets. The audience often learns a lot and can even reinterpret writing in ways that the author didn't even imagine, which I know has happened for me. And so it's just a special experience to be able to hear from the authors themselves. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, now it's Autumn's turn to read. And Autumn has a lot of works that I adore. I love them so much. So it's really hard for me to pick which one to do first. But I think just to go in a similar vein, can you read your poem, The Price of War?
Of course. The Price of War. My grandfather fought in the Vietnam War. He marched through marshland for miles and miles with 85 back-breaking pounds on his shoulders. He dutifully carried the boots in his bag, the helmet on his head, and the glassy-eyed look of the first man he ever saw dead. While my grandfather trudged through jungle dodging bullets, families watched from the safety of their plush-patterned couches. He witnessed comrade after comrade die for a cause Americans no longer believed in, a cause that students and teachers and preachers opposed, a cause he killed for, because that's just the price of war. No one in my family asks my grandfather about his time in Nam. Not after what happened that bitter winter day he came home. My mother says he's a different man now, that he has scars far deeper than the one his purple heart bled for. I know my grandfather didn't die on the battlefield, but death can come in many other forms. When I walk along that low-lit path to the memorial in D.C., I search each of those names for the one I know I will not find.
I really love this piece. I think my favorite line is the one his purple heart bled for. That's just bars, quite literally.
That was one, I brought this poem to class for feedback, and that was one of my classmates, like the majority of my classmates also really enjoyed. And I didn't like this line when I wrote it. I thought it was so cringy, and I was like, oh, people are gonna hate this. And then they loved it, and I was like, oh, cool. I guess I'll keep it in then.
I think people love references, like something that can mean two things, and I think that's really successful in poetry, especially.
Mm-hmm.
No, I really love that. Well, the other question I want to ask you is this piece based on anything?
This one is a little bit. So I've talked about this in our episode where we talked about our book canons, but I absolutely adore the novel The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. And that genuinely made me fall in love with wartime literature. And so when I was in a class where I had to create a poem, and I'm not a big fan of poetry, like writing wise, I prefer to write short stories and novels. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to dabble in something that I genuinely really, really enjoy. And so I was like, I'm going to write about the Vietnam War. I'm going to write a poem about it because, fun fact, my grandfather, one of them, actually did fight in the Vietnam War. So this poem is a little bit of a tribute to him. And so just my way of writing for him, writing experience, but also capturing my love of this novel and kind of wrapping it all into one. And I know some of the comments when I was talking to my classmates about this were, oh, this sounds so much like The Things They Carried, which I was really happy about because I was like, yes, I'm doing it right. Mm-hmm. This is exactly what I wanted, specifically the line where it's like, he carried the boots on his bag, the helmet on his head, blah, 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 blah. That line specifically, I was very much trying to strive for Tim O'Brien's writing style and the way he words things and the way he phrases things. And so I know that one specifically is the one that people identified the most. They're like, oh, that instantly sounds a lot like his voice. And I'm glad that came across because that's exactly what I was going for.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love this piece so much.
There's a style of writing that I don't think gets as much attention anymore. And this is the idea of a creative nonfiction. So this is a work that is based heavily on real life and incorporates real life things. It's usually a story from the author themselves. Creative nonfiction is such an interesting one because it can look so incredibly different. And so I would love Adrienne to read her creative nonfiction piece, A Tangled Mess.
I have a theory that grief doesn't exist, not as a singular emotion. It is simply a tangled mess of so many other emotions it becomes unrecognizable. Grief is sadness. Perhaps the most obvious sign of the affliction of grief is the sadness. I still remember the date. It was Christmas Eve of 2018, and I was wearing a black and white dress with a deep blue ribbon around my waist. The church was dark, as it always was during the Christmas Eve service. We sang Christmas hymns side by side. As with most childhood memories, the colors were more vibrant, and the love was palpable. The pure white candles burned with a happy flicker, the warmth glowing on my mother's face as she sang. The pine wreaths mixed with the scent of the waxy candles made the season, and the anticipation of the next morning even more tangible. The service was interrupted, and I could feel the whole town shudder as we realized that our prayer went unanswered. I have just been given the news that Nate Metzke has passed away due to complications during surgery. Let us pray. The church was so still it felt like time stopped. My lungs crushed like a soda can as huge weight settled over me. The air was broken by cries that still ring in my ears. I couldn't see or hear or feel anything. I didn't want to. My face could never fully express the sorrow that I felt inside, but it sure tried, contorting into painful shapes. I don't remember the rest of the service, the drive home, or falling asleep that night. I do remember the tear tracks that refused to leave for days after. Grief is hope. Hope often comes before grief, but it makes it that much more painful. He had already rung that bell once, and we were sure he would do it again. The whole community was rooting for him, and there was no doubt in our minds that he would beat cancer for good. Nate Meskey was unstoppable, a force of positivity and optimism. He had fought so hard for so long, and it seemed like an unfair ending to rip away that hope at the last minute. But tragic twists of fate do seem to follow those that emanate undeniable goodness. Grief is bitterness. When all is said and done, and a likely victory turns into an unexpected loss, hope often curdles into bitterness. I knew that I wasn't special, that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people mourning the death of our beloved teacher. I knew I was not even in the top 10 of people that felt his death the most, but I still found time to be bitter. I had Nate for a teacher for a mere 3 years. After moving and joining a new school, I had to say goodbye to my teacher, neighbor, and mentor. By the time I knew he'd passed away, I felt like I had mourned him once before. To me, he died twice. Grief is anger. It's easy to blame people when you've lost someone. I was ashamed to admit it, but I was mad at God. How could he take away someone who was such a light to the world like Nate? How could he leave so many of us to suffer, to try and fill a hole that never could be? How could those doctors, with all their degrees and enormous paychecks, not save him? How could they chalk up his death to surgery complications? How could they? Indignance filled me for years, along with the anguish I felt for Nate's family. His young wife and 3 children didn't deserve this. This tragedy beyond words, this wasn't meant for them. Grief is guilt. Time may heal all wounds, but it also steals memories. I don't remember the color of his eyes. It seems silly. It was 6 years ago and I was 13. But you would think that if you loved a person enough, you'd remember something like that. You'd think I would remember his voice. I don't remember how he laughed. We must have laughed every class time, but I can't recall it. Guilt laced with sadness is just regret. There's so many things I wish I would have said. I hope he knew how much I look up to him, how much I loved him. I wish I would have taken more opportunities to know him or make him proud while he was alive. I'll never get that time back. Grief is jealousy. 3 measly years wasn't enough. The burning in my chest as I look through Nate's old photos won't go away. There are students that I remember, a few years older than me, that got so much more time. They had musical after musical with him, honor bands and choirs. They got to graduate with him by their side and got his support while they succeeded after high school. Why were they so lucky? I'd give anything to have a picture with Nate, for his support while I thrive in college. Why didn't I get that? It's not fair. Grief is shock. There are times I forget he's gone. It's been over 6 years since that unbearably sad Christmas Eve, and his death still hits me right between my heart and my soul, somewhere around my lungs. The pain still hasn't lessened. I can't even mention him in conversation without the memory smarting in my mind and the tears stinging in my eyes. As you might have heard, Neely Oakdale's band director, Mr. Metzke, a good friend of mine, passed away over Christmas break. Fresh tears fell as my new music teacher made the announcement in band. He was an amazing person, and I know many people took his loss pretty hard. This song and the scholarship offered to the seniors in this ensemble is dedicated to one of the most amazing directors I ever had the honor of knowing. As the wave of realization ran over me, I felt my body convulse with sobs that had to stay silent during this concert. This song is dedicated to Nate Metzke, who was the embodiment of joy. With every stage of life, I grieve him in a different way. I grieve that I don't get to know him as I am now. The only memories I have left of him are from the perspective of a 13-year-old. At 20 years old, a near adult, I still mourn that I don't get to know him as I am now. Grief is happiness. Nate was an inspiration to everyone, not just me. It's hard to explain pure light, but one thing I'm sure of is that light refracts. Nate spread light everywhere he went. The school in which he taught was a joyous place, and band was always the best part of the day. He was everything a teacher should be. He had a way of making every student feel like they were his favorite. He clearly cared about each and every one of us, and we adored him for it. He was an incredibly talented musician. I remember hearing him play his trumpet for the first time, and I thought, I want to play like that. He knew how to bring humor into everything. He cracked a joke every 30 minutes. He was fond of dad jokes, and at the time we rolled our eyes. Above all, he was passionate. He loved music, and he loved to teach us. Because he had so much enthusiasm, it made us want to love music just as much as he did. He gave me so many beautiful memories that I hang on to. He believed in me. He chose me to be in the school's musical, giving me my first singing role on stage. We were neighbors, and I often babysat his children, and he always trusted in me. He made me feel like I was something special. Grief is longing. I so desperately wish he was alive. I know I'll see him again, but that seems so far away. There's a certain helplessness that grief brings about. Death wins, and you must pretend that it hasn't. You are left to continue as though nothing happened. The spark that was so bright before is quickly extinguished, and you are abandoned in the dark. There's nothing I wouldn't do to speak to him just one more time. I'm following in his footsteps, and I yearn to know what he'd think. I crave his advice, his wisdom. I just want to know if he'd be proud of me. Grief. Grief is not one thing. It is sadness, anger, longing, guilt, and everything in between. Maybe love is the same way, a tangled mess of feelings. They say that grief is love that has nowhere to go. If that's true, then I will hold on to that love, that grief, even if it means pain. Because forgetting means he's really gone.
My question for you about this piece is, as writing is very much a processing method, it's a way that I cope with my emotions, and I know it's a way that you cope with your emotions. So talk about how writing this helped you. Like, it is a real story. It is really your feelings about this situation. So tell us how this piece helped you combat the grief.
For sure. Like I talked about in the story, I remember I was just scrolling through Facebook one day and accidentally came across one of his old students who was a senior when I was like in junior high. So she got a lot of time with him, and she posted like a ton of pictures with him saying like, oh, you know, we miss you, and you were just the greatest teacher I've ever known. And I just remember feeling so jealous that I didn't even have one picture with him because I was 13 when he passed. And that feeling was really odd. I knew it was technically grief, but I just felt more jealous and angry than anything. So that idea of grief being more than one thing and accepting that was really helpful. So I tried to really look inwards and feel all of the different feelings that I was experiencing, even, 6 years later. And I definitely cried a lot while writing this piece. It was really horrible, but now that I'm through it, it was really nice to just get it all out and realize that all of them are valid, and grief is not one thing, and it keeps happening. It doesn't ever really stop. It just changes. And that was really a beautiful thing to realize while writing this.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. Adrienne, I believe it's your turn to pick.
Of course. Well, now, one of my absolute favorite things that Autumn has ever written to date. She just recently wrote it, and I helped her edit it for class. I want to add in, and I read this thing at almost every single stage, and it's been great at every single stage, but now it is truly a work of art. Autumn, can you please read Clocking Out?
Of course. Your heart seized. In one moment you were alive, the next you weren't. When you worked in an office, you had an ancient digital clock propped directly in front of you while you worked. You used to watch the minutes tick down until 5 o'clock. You would anxiously wait for the day to be over. The image of that clock was practically burned into your brain. You could see it just as clearly whether your eyes were open or closed. When you died, that damn clock was the last thing you saw. And you could have sworn you saw the time stop on your final breath at 4:59. If you died tomorrow and had to choose one thing to take with you, what would you choose? It was a stupid hypothetical icebreaker you used to half-heartedly answer during the useless team-building exercises your office would host every quarter. You'd always throw in an answer like a book that you claimed was your favorite but never actually read, something boring and smart-sounding, something that made it seem like you participated more than you actually did. Some of your coworkers, though, took the question very seriously. Calliope would always mention something about her kids, like a terrible drawing one of them made, or the family picture she kept proudly on her desk. Something sentimental like that. You could always count on a religious nut or two to say the Bible, and there was always someone shooting to get a laugh who'd say a bottle of some name-brand whiskey or tequila. It was a pointless question, one that had no real significance to anyone, or so you thought. You were 48 when you died. It wasn't anything tragic. Heart disease ran in your family, so it took no one by surprise when one day yours just quit. You weren't much of a believer in anything while you were still alive. You assumed there had to be something out there responsible for running things, but whoever it was never mattered much to you. You were a mediocre person. Didn't do much good nor bad. You didn't really do much of anything at all. So what happened after you passed was definitely a bit of a surprise. Before you even opened your eyes, you knew you were dead. Mostly because of how light you felt. Your knees and back no longer ached, and it felt like you'd finally gotten the first full night's rest in 40 years. Whatever you were laying on was the most comfortable material you'd ever felt, like something your CFO brother would have. You wished you could lie here forever. You would have, if there wasn't this small tug at where your once beating heart was. It was this small pull forward, like there was still something more you had to do. Take all the time you need. The passing can be a stressful experience. A voice, melodic and genderless, spoke, breaking the silence. It didn't startle you. Rather, it felt strangely like the emotion of comfort, like being a child and getting a hug from your mother while she gently rubbed circles across your back. The voice continued, "We are here to help your transition. So when you are ready, you can open your eyes and begin the process of accepting perfection." When you opened your eyes, nothing was what you imagined. You always thought you'd arrive at some sparkling golden palace with pearly gates, or a series of fiery pools of burning lava. Like one of those places that religious folks like your coworkers would go on long-winded tangents about during lunch. You never imagined the afterlife would look exactly like the office you wasted years of your life in. It even included that same damn digital clock that once again sat directly under your computer monitor and now lazily blinked 4:59 over and over again. You suppose, though, if you were in some sort of hell, that nothing would be more fitting than eternally sitting in the same 9 to 5 you'd been trapped in while you were still alive. Is this some kind of sick joke? You ask angrily, pushing yourself up from what you now notice as a ridiculously comfortable version of your office chair. It somehow simultaneously felt like you won front row tickets to the Super Bowl and woke up before your alarm and realized you got to sleep for another hour. Man, so many of life's problems would be solved if every office had chairs like this. The mortal mind cannot comprehend the waiting area. So for the ease of your transition, you perceive it as the place most familiar to you. That same wonderful voice said lightly. You look around, hoping to find its source. The only thing you saw was your office. It felt strange to be here without your coworkers. You'd always shown up as close to 9 and left as soon as you could, so your annoyingly overzealous coworkers who looked for pointless fulfillment by showing up early and staying late were always already there. Being here without them felt wrong. This isn't hell? You asked, unsure of whether or not you actually want the answer. No, you're in the waiting area, the voice said matter-of-factly. The judgment cannot take place until the cleansing of worldly imperfection. If you are ready to begin, simply type the worldly imperfection you wish to keep onto the electronic interface presented before you. You assumed that the headless voice could only mean the computer on its desk, despite the excessive use of unnecessary language. As you looked at the screen, it suddenly flicked on to an empty search bar, but for a search engine you've never heard of. WID. Underneath, the full title was written out in small, colorful text. Worldly Imperfection Database. Not a creative bunch whoever named it. What am I supposed to do with this? You asked the empty office space. The headless voice responded immediately. You must type the worldly imperfection you wish to keep after the judgment. The voice responded like any of that nonsense was actually supposed to mean something. I'm not sure who or what you are, but if you're going to keep saying stuff that doesn't make any sense, you're going to have to explain what it means if you actually want me to do something. The voice didn't respond this time. Instead, a pop-up appeared on screen. It was a small image of a ball of light with text reading, "Questions about the transition? You're not alone. Here's a step-by-step guide to navigating your afterlife experience." The more you looked at it, you became convinced that it might actually be a ball of light. You sat back into the chair that must have been designed by a rich bastard that selfishly kept it hidden from the world because riots would have broken out over it, and clicked the pop-up. "Well, hello there, human!" A small anamorphic bee wearing a top hat zipped across the screen, looked directly at you with its massive cartoonish eyes, and waved. It seems like you've got some questions about the afterlife process. No worries. I believe in you, and I am here to help. You stifle a grimace at the stupid bee pun. Maybe you are in hell. The whole process is simple, the bee continued in a too cheerful voice. When you die, small red X's appeared over its eyes. You are taken to the waiting area. That's where you are right now, you lucky duck. While here, you must begin the cleansing of worldly imperfections. Once you do that, the judgment will begin. It's really that simple. But if you have a question about the waiting area, press 1. If you want to know more about the cleansing of worldly imperfections, press 2. If you don't let the obnoxious bee finish before pressing 2. As you interrupted it mid-sentence, you could have sworn annoyance flicked over its face briefly before it returned to the over-the-top enthusiasm from before. It looks like you want to know more about the cleansing of worldly imperfections. No worries. I, Beanard S. Honey, can help. Much more of this, and you're going to strangle the damn bee. Life is full of messy imperfection. So you can only choose one thing you want to take with you from your life on Earth into the afterlife. This could be anything. If you need examples, all you have to do is ask. You slammed your finger on the escape key and hit the power button on the monitor. You watched as the screen quickly faded to black and that stupid bee almost looked sad before he too disappeared. You stared blankly at the dark screen. Choose something from your life you want to keep. The notion was ridiculous and practically unethical. There were probably hundreds of thousands of things you should want to keep, and yet nothing came to mind. Not a single thing. You let out a sigh and erratically tapped your fingers against the desk. While you stared at this screen, you were confronted with the uneasy reality that there was nothing from your life worth keeping, because in the end, you never really did anything of value. You worked the same terrible office job for the last 20 years. You practically lived in that office. Yet you never rose through the ranks like some of your coworkers. You never set out to accomplish more. Your life was just unimpressive. With how much time you wasted away there, you would have thought you'd have made a name for yourself. But you never did. Your brother was always the successful one. He made something of himself and got the good job, which he scaled the ladder of quickly. He had the wife who fell for him in their whirlwind romance that was loyal and kind. His kids were talented and smart and well-behaved. That is a valuable life. He had so many things worth keeping. You, on the other hand, did not. What was your meager life compared to his? What if you hesitated to ask the unhelpful voice? What if there's nothing from my life worth keeping? There was silence for a moment, and the office around felt strangely off-kilter, like the outskirts of it wobbled. We do not understand. Please clarify. Of course the stupid voice didn't understand. You ran a hand through what was left of your balding hair. I don't want to keep anything from my life. It was worthless. The voice responded too quickly for your comfort. You are correct. Your life was insignificant. But that does not mean it did not have value. To put it in terms you, as a human, can understand, you are a penny. You are now obsolete, but you, in a technical sense, still have value, even though you are no longer in use. Instead of acknowledging the slightly degrading response, you scanned all of the desks in your office. Each held personal items and decorations which showcased the personality of each occupant. Calliope's was covered in crayon art of her children with their family picture front and center. Jake's was decorated with small Lego sets of all the places he'd visited. Jane's was plastered with more motivational kitten posters than you thought should be available on the market. You could clearly see what each person valued. When you looked at your own desk, there was nothing. No family pictures, no quirky decorations, nothing to show that someone spent the majority of their life here. The only thing that was there was that damn clock. Why won't it change time? Why can't it be 5? Your breath hitched unexpectedly. You're not someone to get bogged down by emotions. Your level head was always something you had taken pride in. It made you reliable, steady. But this, whatever was happening now, was too much. Please, just let me leave. Your voice cracked slightly. I don't want to take anything. I just want to move on. Please, let me. It was pathetic to be begging like this, but you were tired and you didn't want to think about your pitiful existence anymore. Something in the air around you seemed to soften, like the room was trying to give you more space to breathe. You blinked, and a warm cup of tea appeared on your desk. It even had that stupid bee's face plastered on it, and a speech bubble above its head that read, "Everything will be all right." You decided against taking a sip. There's really nothing you want to take with you into the afterlife? Not even your memories? For the first time since you heard it speak, the voice showed a hint of emotion. You shook your head. There was nothing worth remembering, and definitely nothing worth taking either. There was a long silence after that, and a small part of yourself wondered if the voice was ever coming back. Maybe you would be stuck here for eternity if you didn't choose something. Normally we don't do this, the voice spoke finally, but an exception has been made. They believe it will help you make a decision. They are granting you temporary permission to return to Earth incorporeally. I don't understand, you say as your body began to tingle strangely. You will. And that was the last thing you heard from the voice before the floor beneath you disappeared. It took a moment for your eyes to adjust to the lavish living room of your brother's apartment. His white couch was impeccable. The pillows were perfectly placed, and the throw blanket looked as if it was ironed flat. You wouldn't be surprised to learn if it actually was. The place even smelled perfect, like clean linen and mahogany. Family pictures lined the wall. Your brother looked sophisticated, always dressed in the same pressed black suit, while sitting next to his bleach blonde wife while their kids sat in front wearing small, perfect suits of their own. They were the exact same photos he used to send in holiday cards each year. You always found them so cheesy, like they were bragging about the perfectness of their happy cookie-cutter family. And yet, that didn't stop you from keeping every single one. From shoving those photos into the same desk drawer, because despite how much you envied their life, you couldn't bring yourself to throw them away. Your gaze got caught on an opened envelope in the entry table your brother must have forgotten to tuck away into his at-home office. The date snagged your interest immediately. April 16th. It had been at least a week since you died already. You found it strange since you hadn't felt like much time had passed in your waiting area. It couldn't have been more than 20 minutes, and yet the world had already moved on. You looked down at your shaking hands, surprised that they didn't look any different than when you were alive. Somehow, though, you knew they were, that there was no real form keeping you here. You just couldn't put your finger on why. You took a steadying breath and walked away from the photos on the wall and the envelope to take in the view from the large floor-to-ceiling windows that lined the rest of the walls. You'd only visited your brother's apartment once, long before he married and had kids, but what you remember most was the view. His skyrise apartment looked down on the rest of the city. You watched people buzz around the city. Now, though, it was dark. The city lights twinkled much more than the stars ever did. You pressed your hand against the chilly glass, surprised you could feel the temperature at all. A second later, you heard the door click as your brother walked in. His graying hair was rustled, and his suit jacket was thrown casually over his shoulder. After setting down his keys in a small wooden bowl by the door, he headed straight to the kitchen. You didn't follow. Instead, your attention fell to the clock, one you knew didn't belong on the mantel, one that looked eerily similar to the same digital clock that you kept on your work desk. This one, too, flashed at the same time over and over again. 4:59. 4:59. 4:59. A phone rang in the other room. What, Tessa? Your brother sounded angry at his wife. That took you a little by surprise. No, I was not at work again. You heard shuffling and what sounded like a cabinet being opened. Because I was at my brother's fucking funeral. The cabinet slammed shut with a loud bang. Wouldn't you like to know? Fine. Yes. Fine. I told you I would be there. The fridge opened and closed quickly. Tessa, will you shut your mouth for 1 second? Yes. I took the afternoon off work. I don't know why you refused to bring the papers for me to sign at the office. I don't want to hear it. I agreed to the stupid divorce. No. No. No! Tessa! I will be there. There was a pause, and your brother's voice grew softer. Tell the boys I'll take them to the arcade this weekend. Yeah. Yep. I know. You heard your brother hang up as he walked into the room before he plopped down on the couch. You didn't look at him, though. You still couldn't tear your eyes off that damn clock, hoping it would change. I hope you're happy, Rory, because you are one fucking bastard. Your brother said quietly. You quickly turned, surprised that your brother could see you, only to find him staring at an old family picture in his hand, one he must have grabbed from the kitchen. It was clear he wasn't talking to you then, at least not the version of you who stood invisible across the room. The photo was gripped tightly between his hands, turning his knuckles white. It was the photo taken right before your dad died. It was the Florida trip where you both got so sunburnt you could hardly move. Your mom forced you to wear these giant hats she found at one of the 100 gift shops near the beach. Everyone in the photo looked so happy. That was a long time ago, and so much has changed since. Your brother slammed the photo down on the mahogany coffee table in front of him. A small glass of whiskey he must have grabbed from the kitchen nearly tipped over onto the gray patterned rug. You had everything. You had every goddamn thing. How could you go and die? How could you do that? Your brother picked up the glass and watched the amber liquid swirl before downing the rest. You piece of shit! You shook your head and a hollow laugh escaped. I had everything? I had everything. Of course he thought you had everything. Of course the man with everything couldn't be content. He had everything he could ever need. What could he possibly want from your crappy life? Anger burned in the back of your throat. Your brother threw the glass across the room, and it shattered against the wall of family photos, knocking down several with it. You watched as a single drop of amber slid across your sister-in-law's forever frozen, smiling face. The anger you held quickly chilled. You realized your brother's rage wasn't targeted at you alone. I worked my entire life for this. Your brother loosely gestured to the surrounding room. I climbed the corporate ladder while you were stuck at a sucky entry-level desk job. He let out a hollow laugh. I married the beautiful wife. I had the perfect family. Your brother shook his head. Mom was there, you know. Said I should talk to you. Air out my grievances. It's stupid, though. Talking to a dead man. You noticed a tear streak down his face. You and your brother were never very close after your father passed. It wasn't like something went wrong. You simply lived different lives. You just never realized how different. How'd you do it, Rory? You sat down on the couch next to your brother and spoke to him, despite knowing he would never hear you again. Do what? This is stupid. Not like you can answer. You watched your brother pick up the photo again. His thumb gently rubbed the frame. It's just, I don't know how you managed it all. Your family and your job. How'd you have time for both? Your chest tightened and you understood his resentment. You were opposite sides of the same penny. Your brother was a workaholic. He spent more time in the office than with his kids. A long time ago, you watched your father work himself to death. It left your mother in shambles. Your brother wasn't old enough to understand, but you did. You spent as little time in the office because of it. You were terrified of wasting away like your father. You never wanted to leave your family the way your father left yours, the way your brother was losing his. You wished you could tell him that, to stop spending so many hours in the office, instead spend them with his kids. Your favorite memories were the moments you got off work, when you'd pick up your wife and spend the evening picnicking in the park or reading at her favorite cafe. You may not have been successful at work, but that's because your life wasn't there. Your life was spent in the moments beyond those 4 office walls. No, it wasn't grand, but it was full. It upset you how much time you spent resenting your brother's success while he was resenting you back. I stopped wasting effort on being good at my job, you responded, wishing your brother could hear those words. I didn't want to die in that office when everything that really mattered was outside of it. Guess that plan didn't pan out the way I hoped. Your brother stood up finally and walked over to the broken picture of his family. He gingerly picked it up. I'm so sorry. You weren't sure whether he said it to you or them. It didn't really matter. You walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the fine cotton of your brother's shirt beneath your fingers. I know. You still got time, though. That's when you finally felt a pull. There was a small glimmer of hope in your chest, a faint tapping on your heart. No, your soul. A push, you might say. An answer. It was time for you to go. You had a decision to make after all. Your brother closed his eyes and let out a sigh. Goodbye, Rory. Goodbye, Lenny. You turned towards the clock and took a breath. I think I'm ready now. In a blink, you were back in that familiar office space, and for the first time in your entire life, you were excited to be there. Rather than dwell in the space any further, you quickly sat down on that heavenly office chair as the computer blinked on. You clacked your answer using the mechanical keyboard resting on your desk into that familiar search bar. As soon as you hit enter, the letters began emitting a soft golden light. This light began to seep downwards, running off the letters out of the computer and past the still steaming mug of tea into heavy globs like honey. You swore that B on the mug smiled bigger. Warm drops fell atop your hands as the office around you drew further and further away. You didn't notice, though. Your eyes were fixated on that blinking clock. As the space around you slowly disappeared, a single tear slid across your cheek, and that clock finally clicked forward from 4:59 to 5 o'clock.
This piece is truly, it's art. It's just amazing. I love it so much. I genuinely have chills from hearing that read out loud just now. So we could talk about this piece forever, but the question I want you to answer is, what is your favorite decision in this piece?
Oh, that's a good question. I have to think about that.
And furthermore, when you answer what is your favorite decision in this piece, what either made you choose to write that, or did it just happen and you went along with it, and did that influence the story?
I think, honestly, my favorite part of this story, even though I do love all of it, is probably the scene where we finally get him interacting with his brother. Because I knew from the very start of the story, one of the main conflicts was going to be our main character, Rory, struggling to find value in his life because he's constantly comparing it to his brother. And so I loved the idea of being like, oh, what if his brother's comparing his life to Rory's? And they're basically in this argument that they don't really know about, that they're at each other's throats and they're constantly envying each other's life, and they don't really know why until Rory figures it out. And I did know that from the beginning that was going to be a bit of a conflict. And so I wrote out this scene, and then I presented to class, and my classmates, along with myself, didn't really like the initial version. Adrienne also had comments about that version too. And they brought forth a lot of really interesting ideas of some things that I had started about in the back of my mind, but because of like the timeline and also the fact that when I was writing this, I was really sick, I just didn't incorporate more. I finally added them into this second version, and one of my favorite things is adding the fact that Lenny is getting divorced. And we hear this conversation over the phone where he's just arguing with his wife. I don't know what about it. I love that conflict and that what it showcases about both characters. And it was a very much a purposeful decision. And it was something in my mind, I was like, in the back of my mind, I was like, ah, yes, Lenny's getting a divorce because, you know, he's a workaholic. He literally does not spend time with his kids. He would rather spend them in the office. And so that was definitely something. But I think from that, the whole idea of their dad being a workaholic and him dying in the office because of the stress that it put on him and the effects that it had on both of the sons, that was something that happened organically while I was writing, and I loved it. I was like, oh my gosh, this adds so much clarity to both of the characters. And I didn't even mean to do it.
That's valid. Okay, I have one more question.
Oh.
For the listeners at home, because we all want to know. Do you know what Rory chose to take with him? the worldly imperfection. And I know you probably didn't want to tell us on purpose because that's the point of the story and it's left to interpretation, but do you have an idea of what he took?
In the initial draft, when I was initially coming up with this idea, I had no idea. And then I came up with an idea and I presented that idea to Adrienne and she didn't like it. And so when I presented to my class, I had this idea of like, oh, I do kind of know what he would take with him. But when I was rewriting it and when I was coming up with these new drafts, I have a semblance of an idea, but I think it's a lot more up to the interpretation and I want it to be that way. So like anything you say, like if you come up with something of like, oh, this is what he would take, then I'm like, sure, you know. I don't have like a specific thing of like, oh, this is exactly what he took. I more so have like a feeling and a vibe of what he does that I'm not going to share because
it's more impactful if you don't, honestly.
Yeah,
it's so fun.
I knew going into that, I was like, I don't want to specify what he takes. And that, honestly, there's a short story out there. I think it's called The Lady and the Tiger. And that one basically, there's this lady in like Roman times and her dad's the king and she falls for this like common dude and then that gets caught. And so basically the king puts him into this pit and there are two options. There are two doors. And one door behind it is a tiger that'll, you know, kill him. And then behind the other one is basically a wife and a family that, like, he gets a wife. And so either way, it's a win-win for the king. But for the princess, she loses him both ways. And so he looks to her to make the decision of which door to go through. And the audience, we don't get to know what she chose. Whether she let him go to the tiger so no one else could have him, or she let him live and be without her.
Ooh.
So I took a little bit of inspiration from that, of the ambiguity of that ending, and I knew from the beginning I wanted to incorporate that.
I love this piece. It's so good. It's so good. And also, this piece did win a prize, by the way, that Autumn's too humble to mention, but it won second place in our English conference that happened on our campus just recently, which is very cool.
I was
very
not
awesome.
expecting that. I did not expect the amount of wisdom to come out of this piece when I was writing it. I was just like, oh, isn't it a cool concept of like in the afterlife mythos that, you know, what if you could only take one thing with you from life? And then I found Rory as just this tired, middle-aged office worker and who didn't really have a lot of meaning in his life. And I was like, oh, damn. This is...
Let's play with this.
Let's play with this. And it hit a lot harder than I intended to. I remember I was practicing reading it aloud because part of being in this conference is we have to read it as a panel. And I only got to read 10 minutes of it, so I just read the beginning. But for fun, I read the ending. And when I was reading it out loud, it was genuinely making me tear up. I was like, damn, it's sad, it's happy, but that was not what I was expecting from writing it. I never expect for my writing to be good. I write a lot of times for me, and I write to process things. And so when other people can find meaning and value in my own writing, it's one of the most, like, utmost compliments, because a lot of times when I'm doing it, I don't intend to do that, but sometimes it just happens, and it very much happened in this case. Now it's your turn again. I'm going to have Adrienne read another poem, and this one is Cosmo.
Cosmo. People have asked, what's the point of alcohol? With a twinge of condescension, they proclaim, I have no interest in it personally. It tastes bad, it makes you make poor decisions, ruins families, and I just don't see the point. And while I understand and respect the decision, I can never give an honest answer back. What is the lure of alcohol? I don't want to be drunk. I'm not looking for a quick fix. But that burn, that bite of adulthood, feels like growing up. It feels like moving on, and it tastes like a cosmopolitan. I don't want to lose my head to it. I don't want to make choices I'll regret. But there's just something about going forward into adulthood while they are still stuck at 20. There's a lot of people here in this local bar. It definitely smells like too many people. There's hard metal chairs and flashing lights that might just permanently damage my retinas. But maybe, if the music's loud enough, I can forget the last 2 decades. Or 2 months, I'm not choosy, and become someone more mature, someone worthy of 21.
I love this one. Genuinely, I think both of us being around the age that we are can really relate to this, and I think this is very much a poem that's very much a universal experience. I feel like this poem very much grasps the essence of adulthood and being on the cusp of adulthood and growing up and changing. So was that your intention when you were writing it, to capture that feeling? And how so? Like, what kind of inspiration did you take for this one?
It is very much a poem about growing up, but not fully. This poem was inspired by a very hard situation that I went through, and it just meant a lot to me because it happened right around my birthday, and I turned 21 finally. And before this, I was so adamant that I didn't want to drink at all. But then the feeling of turning 21 and being able to have that physical thing of, I'm allowed to do this now. And that's what felt like I was finally moving forward. While, again, they're still stuck at 20. And that was just a really comforting thing, weirdly. And it was a really weird thought to have, so I wrote a poem about it to try and see where I was feeling with that. It's kind of a common theme with all my poetry. I have a weird thought, and I'm like, well, let's write about this, because otherwise I'm going to go crazy. So
I think that's genuinely where some of the best stories come from. But I love this idea of, it's almost two meanings, like two different ways of growing up, is literally growing up and growing up to the age of like being able to drink, but also growing past that old self while there are other people around you who are still staying in this immaturity. And I think it's a very powerful message.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now we have the last piece that Autumn is going to read on this episode today. And I also really love this one. Can you sense a theme? I love Autumn's writing. So this is They Were the Lucky Ones.
They were the lucky ones. Lieutenant Adam Price supposed he should consider himself lucky that he was not the one laying beneath 6 feet of freshly placed dirt like Joseph Miller. But all he could think was, lucky bastard. Miller was 2 days away from leaving for R&R in Tokyo, Japan, when he was gunned down outside of Vinmock. 3 others, Ronnie Wilson, Dennis Jackson, and Ray Harris, were also in Miller's patrol unit. They, luckily, survived. You want to know what I think? Ray Harris said. He's lucky. What are you on about? Asked Ronnie Wilson. Miller doesn't have to carry around all this shit anymore. Ray Harris pointed to the large pack he and the rest of the grunts carried. That's fucked up. None of them disagreed with either sentiment. The night after they buried Joseph Miller, Ray Harris took the tattered New Testament he grabbed from Miller's body and burned it. What are you burning his Bible for? Ronnie Wilson asked. If there's actually a God out there, maybe he'll strike me down too, just like Miller, the lucky bastard. Will you shut up? Said Dennis Jackson. That could have been us. What don't you get about that? That should have been us. Miller's dead, but we're alive. Don't you know how fucking lucky we are? Yeah, said Harris. But what good is being alive if we're just going to get shot tomorrow? They continued to argue while Lieutenant Adam Price listened to their conversation. He thought he should say something. He should tell them to stop before a fight broke out. But he didn't. He just sat there and continued to listen to their conversation because he agreed with Ray Harris. They weren't the lucky ones. Joseph Miller was.
This is a very cool piece also. And spoiler alert, this one is a creative imitation based on the things they carried. So, Autumn, my question for you about this piece is, what did you change about your writing style to match Tim O'Brien's more? Like, what specifically that you can point to in this piece?
One of the biggest thing is using their full names. That is something that Tim O'Brien very much does in his writing style. And also the dialogue itself is a lot more crass than I normally write. And it is a lot more real. It sounds like a bunch of guys who are stuck sitting there while war was going on around them. I very much tried to imitate his writing style of dialogue, but I also used M dashes, which I don't use a lot in my own writing, but you know, Tim O'Brien does sometimes, mainly because in his writing he's using a lot of lists and you can only use so many commas before it becomes confusing. But definitely in this piece, the tone of everything is very, very reminiscent of Tim O'Brien's writing style, and that is done explicitly on purpose. I use some military jargon like R&R, which is something that he uses as well. And I also specifically refer to a real village, Vinmock, that was around during the times of Vietnam War. And I tried to use as specific of details as I could, even though this is not something that I've necessarily experienced myself.
That's very cool.
All right, now it's time for Adrienne's last story. And this is Stupid, Stupid Child.
Stupid, stupid child. You didn't know then that getting that Kindle for Christmas would begin a decade of regret. Stupid, stupid child. You started reading this book. It was available for free. You didn't want to spend your parents' money on books, and you didn't really know how to navigate the internet at 11 years old. You started reading it, and it was pretty close to your first experience with romance, if you can call it that. You don't really remember most of the book. You don't even remember the title, but you remember the bedroom scene. The people in the book were doing something, and you didn't know what any of it meant, but somehow you knew that you shouldn't be reading it. That was enough to make you keep reading, but you instinctively kept hiding it. You highlighted passages and went back to them. You felt guilty and you didn't understand why. You tried to tell your mom about it in the kitchen before dinner one night, but you downplayed how much time you spent rereading those strange words. You said that you returned it. You said that it was over, that you just read a bad book. You cried and you felt better for a little while. You couldn't figure out how to remove those highlighted passages from that godforsaken Kindle, so you never touched it again. But you know you couldn't get rid of it. What if someone found it? What if they found that evidence? You stupid, stupid child. It escalated from there. You searched up dirty books on your flip phone in the middle of the night when your parents were asleep. You read scenes that were increasingly more graphic because it was never enough. You learned without knowing what it all meant. You had the talk at church on Wednesday night, but you left more confused than ever. You learned how to masturbate next. You didn't know the term or what it meant, but you knew it felt good. You still felt guilty, but you did it every night. The same routine. Search, read, watch, feel, sleep. You don't remember the next few years. Maybe you blocked them out, but you know that it never left you. You learned the word addiction, but you didn't want that label, so you ignored it. When people made jokes about it, you pretended to laugh, to be disgusted by people who watched it. And that little nest of guilt festered and rotted away some vital part of you. You dared to think that you were better, didn't you? Stupid, stupid child. You thought because you told someone for the first time that meant you were free? You thought because you could stop for a year at a time that it was over? No, it always came back to haunt you. It was never over, you just took a break, and then went right back. When things got hard and you wanted a distraction, all those things you were taught about healthy coping skills went out the window, and you turned back to it. You turned back, even though you knew that it ruined what you could have had. You met someone. You thought this would be the end. You found someone you loved and who really loved you back, and they were amazing, but you just saw how different you were from them. That special, God-given part of them isn't broken beyond repair. They're not broken beyond repair. Stupid, stupid child. And you feel so guilty, after all this time, knowing that another woman's tits or another man's body on a damn screen makes you more excited than your partner, knowing that your desire is broken and you can't give them what they deserve. That Kindle still lives under your bed, unable to be donated, and it's unbearable to think about using it. It haunts you still, 10 years later. All those versions of you that you could have saved survive, as frail as they are in your memory. From that 11-year-old doe-eyed little girl to the 21-year-old adult about to be married. And that's all you have. The ghosts of yourself. Ironic, isn't it? You walked this walk alone, and even though you've told so many people, they don't know you still struggle. They don't know that you're still walking this damn road, because your testimony is only impressive if you've beaten it. It's only inspirational if you did it by yourself, with no help, with a clean break. They can't know you're weak. You can fool yourself all you want, but you're still an addict pretending to be saved. Stupid, stupid child.
Once again, hitting us with a very real story. This is a story that has a really good example of using this idea or motif that you carry throughout and you keep repeating. And that happens to be the title. So do you want to talk about how you use that phrase and what inspired you to use it as this almost connection device throughout the story?
Yeah, this is a very intense piece, and there's a lot of thoughts in here about the same situation, but it's all very different. So it was really hard to connect. But I wanted this continuing feeling of being angry at oneself, almost. Because it is told in the second person. So it's you talking to you, somewhat. And calling yourself stupid, stupid child is just a callback to how it all started at, what did the story say, 11 years old. And still feeling like you're that stupid child that you once were and like nothing changed. This has been a super fun episode to record, reading out our work that we're super proud of. And of course, we have a lot more that we would love to share with you all. So if any of the listeners want to view more of our work, we will be posting on the Right Angle Instagram and Facebook where you would be able to read some more of our work.
We're really glad to finally be able to share our writing because I know we talk about it a lot. And so finally getting the opportunity for you, the listener, to actually hear what we've written, it's a different experience. And I'm so grateful that we, the authors, get to read it because we can, kind of push you towards an understanding. Because when you read in your head, you always read it one way. But when we're writing it, we write it a certain way. So being able to show you oh, here's how we interpreted it.
That is so true. Well, thank you all so much for listening. That's it from The Right Angle, where we know the real magic of books is for everyone. Readers, writers, and all those in between.
Until next time, write boldly, read unapologetically,
and stay weird.